2 Oscars, 10 Grammys, 5 Emmys, a Tony, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The only artist in history to achieve #1 albums across 6 consecutive decades. Barbra Streisand conquered everything the entertainment world could offer. But on June 17, 1967, standing before 135,000 people in Central Park, something happened. In the middle of a song, her mind went blank. She forgot the lyrics. For just a few seconds, she froze in silence, and those few seconds destroyed something inside her that 27 years of therapy couldn't fix. Because here's the truth. Nobody told you about Barbra Streisand. The woman with the most powerful voice of the century was so terrified of stepping on stage that she disappeared for nearly 3 decades. The perfectionist who demanded excellence from everyone around her was paralyzed by her own imperfection. And the star the world celebrated as an absolute icon grew up being called too ugly, too strange, too Jewish to ever have a shot at success. How did a Brooklyn girl that not even her own mother believed in becoming the greatest female artist of all time? Why was she punished for every victory she claimed? And what did it cost her that not even 60 years of applause could erase? Before we answer that, we need to go back to 1942, a cold house in Brooklyn, to a 15-month-old child who just lost her father, and to the moment rejection planted a seed that would transform into something no one could have predicted. Barbra Jones Streisand was born on April 24, 1942 in Brooklyn, New York, into a world that would waste no time teaching her she did not belong. Her father, Emanuel Streisand, a respected high school teacher and scholar, died suddenly when Barbra was only 15 months old. A cerebral hemorrhage took him without warning, and with him went any chance of the childhood she might have known. She would later say she had no memory of him, only the crushing absence where a father should have been. That void became the silent wound she would carry for the rest of her life. A father's love she never knew but always ached for. Her mother, Diana, was left to raise 2 children alone in working-class Brooklyn, struggling to survive on a secretary's modest salary. But survival came with a cost. Diana was cold, emotionally unreachable, a woman hardened by grief and bitterness, who had little patience for a daughter who dared to dream. Where Barbra craved affection, Diana offered criticism. Where Barbra sought encouragement, Diana delivered harsh verdicts about reality. You're not pretty enough. You're not talented enough. Stop dreaming and find a real job. Years later, Barbra would confess with painful honesty that her mother never once told her she was beautiful or believed in her talent. Not once. Every achievement, every milestone was met with silence or dismissal. The wound of being unseen by the one person whose approval she craved most became the scar she would spend a lifetime trying to heal. When Diana remarried, the home became even colder. Her stepfather, Louis Kind, was indifferent at best, hostile. At worst, he had no interest in the strange skinny girl with the prominent nose and unusual voice. Barbra was left to fend for herself emotionally. A child growing up in a house where she felt like an unwelcome guest. At school, the cruelty continued. She was mocked relentlessly for her appearance. Her nose was too big, her frame too thin, her clothes too shabby. Other children laughed at her secondhand dresses, her awkward manner, her refusal to blend in. She didn't fit the mold of what a girl was supposed to be: pretty, quiet, conventional. And for that, she was punished daily. Even her voice, the instrument that would one day mesmerize millions, was ridiculed. Teachers told her she sang too loud, too strange, too different. Classmates mimicked her Brooklyn accent. Neighbors dismissed her dreams as absurd. A girl like her, they said, would never make it. But here is where Barbra's story takes a turn that separates survival from defiance. Instead of shrinking under the weight of rejection, she began to armor herself with it. If the world called her ugly, she would refuse to change. If they mocked her voice, she would make it impossible to ignore. If her mother withheld love, she would seek validation from the world itself. She later recalled, "I was always told I wasn't pretty, wasn't good enough, so I decided I would just have to be the best." That single sentence held the blueprint of everything that followed. Barbra did not seek to fit in. She sought to dominate at Erasmus Hall High School. She joined. The choir appeared in school plays and began performing wherever anyone would let her. Talent shows, small clubs, anywhere she could stand and sing. Each performance was an act of rebellion, a refusal to accept the verdict that she was not enough. By her late teens, she had dropped out of school and set her sights on Manhattan. With no money, no connections, and no encouragement from anyone who mattered, she walked into the unforgiving world of show business, carrying nothing but a voice and a will forged in the fires of a childhood that tried to break her. The unwanted girl from Brooklyn was about to become impossible to ignore. In 1960, at just 18 years old, Barbra Streisand left Brooklyn with a suitcase, $50, and a dream so audacious it bordered on delusion. She moved into a tiny roach-infested apartment in Manhattan, sleeping on a mattress on the floor, surviving on packets of mustard and ketchup stolen from diners when she couldn't afford food. This was not a romantic struggle. This was desperation. She made the rounds of every nightclub, every audition, every casting call that would have her, and the answer almost always was no. Casting directors took one look at her and dismissed her before she could sing a note. "You're not right for this. You don't have the look. Maybe try character roles," one agent told her bluntly. "Fix your nose, cap your teeth, and change your name. Then maybe you'll have a shot." Barbra refused, not out of confidence, but out of defiance, born from years of being told she wasn't enough. If she changed herself to fit their mold and still failed, she would have nothing left. But if she stayed exactly as she was and succeeded, she would prove that the world had been wrong all along. So she kept her nose, kept her name, just dropping. The second A from Barbra to stand out, and kept singing in ways that made people stop mid-con conversation and turn their heads. Her break came not through glamour, but through sheer strangeness. In 1960, she entered a talent contest at a gay nightclub in Greenwich Village called The Lion. She sang in a style no one had heard before. Emotional, theatrical, vulnerable, raw. She won, and more importantly, she was invited back. The Lion became her training ground. Night after night, she performed for audiences who appreciated the unconventional, who celebrated the outsider. They didn't care that she wasn't pretty by traditional standards. They cared that when she sang, she made you feel something. Word began to spread about the odd girl with the impossible voice. She started booking gigs at other clubs. The Boneser, a small basement venue, became her stage. The audience was small, sometimes just a dozen people, but those who heard her never forgot. Yet, even as her reputation grew in underground circles, mainstream doors remained locked. Broadway producers dismissed her. Television shows passed her over. She was too ethnic, they said, too Jewish, too New York. Her look was wrong. Her manner is too intense. Her refusal to conform is too stubborn. She survived on tips and the occasional $20 booking, still sleeping on floors, still skipping meals. There were nights she cried alone in her tiny apartment, wondering if her mother had been right all along. Maybe she was fooling herself. Maybe the dream was just that, a dream. But then something shifted. In 1961, she was cast in an off-Broadway revue called Another Evening with Harry Stones. It was a small production, but critic reviews mentioned her. A talent to watch, one wrote. For the first time, someone with influence had noticed. Television came next. A guest appearance on The Jack Paar Show in 1961, then PM East. PM West. America got its first glimpse of the strange, mesmerizing young woman from Brooklyn. Some viewers were confused, others were captivated, but no one could look away. Agents who had rejected her began calling. Casting directors reconsidered. And in 1962, the role that would change everything came calling. Broadway producer David Merrick was casting I Can Get It For You Wholesale, a musical about New York's garment industry. The role of Miss Marlstein, a frumpy secretary, was small, but it was Broadway. Barbra auditioned and stunned the room. Merrick cast her immediately. When the show opened in March 1962, Barbra, then just 19 years old, stopped the show nightly with her one big number. Critics singled her out. The girl everyone said was too ugly, too odd, too different, had just become the breakout star of a Broadway musical. The hungry years had not ended yet, but they were about to. The girl they said would never make it was now impossible to ignore. After I Can Get It For You Wholesale, Barbra Streisand was no longer a curiosity. She was a phenomenon. Offers poured in, television appearances multiplied, and in 1963, she released her debut album, the Barbra Streisand album. It climbed to number 8 on the Billboard charts and won 2 Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year. She was 21 years old, but the real transformation came in 1964, when she was cast as Fanny Brice in the Broadway musical Funny Girl. The role seemed written for her. A Jewish girl from New York who defied beauty standards to become a star. Fans' story mirrored Barbra's own telling. She was too ugly, too ethnic, too different, and yet undeniable. When Funny Girl opened on March 26, 1964, Barbra became an overnight icon. Critics ran out of superlatives. Audiences gave her standing ovations before she finished singing. The show became the hottest ticket on Broadway, running for over 1,300 performances. And Barbra's name blazed on the marquee in lights she had once only dreamed of. She had arrived. The girl nobody believed in was now the most celebrated star on Broadway. During this time, she married actor Elliott Gould, her co-star from Wholesale. The marriage in 1963 seemed like a fairy tale. 2 young savers finding love. In the chaos of show business, but fame is a merciless companion. As Barbra's star skyrocketed, Elliott stalled. The dynamic shifted. She became the breadwinner, the name, the star. And though they tried to hold on, the imbalance began to fracture what little stability they had. Hollywood came calling in 1967. Columbia Pictures wanted to adapt Funny Girl for the screen, and they wanted Barbra to reprise her role. It was an extraordinary gamble. She had never acted in a film, never worked in front of a camera in that capacity. Yet they were handing her a leading role in a major motion picture. When Funny Girl premiered in September 1968, Barbra silenced every remaining doubter. Her performance was electric, funny, heartbreaking, and utterly magnetic. The film became a box office hit, and Barbra's rendition of People became one of the most iconic vocal performances ever recorded. In April 1969, at the 41st Academy Awards, Barbra won the Oscar for Best Actress, tying with Katharine Hepburn, at just 26 years old. She had conquered Broadway, music, and now film. She had achieved what seemed impossible, and got within reach. Universal recognition, and a career most could only fantasize about. But even at the height of triumph, shadows gathered. Her marriage to Elliott Gould was crumbling. The pressures of fame, the imbalance of success, and the relentless demands of her career left little room for intimacy. They divorced in 1971, and though it was amicable, Barbra felt the sting of failure. She had conquered stages and studios, but personal happiness remained elusive. Worse still, the higher she climbed, the more vicious the criticism became. Tabloids obsessed over her appearance. Comics mocked her nose in cruel sketches. Critics, often male, attacked her as difficult, demanding, controlling. The same perfectionism that made her great became a weapon used against her. She was called a diva, a tyrant, impossible to work with. Labels rarely applied to men with the same standards, and beneath it all, the wound from childhood lingered. No amount of applause could erase the voice of her mother saying she wasn't good enough. No trophy could fill the void left by a father who died before she could know him. Success had given her everything except the one thing she still craved: to feel truly loved. Not for what she achieved, but for who she was. Years later, she would admit, "I thought if I became successful enough, the pain would go away, but it never did." By 1969, Barbra Streisand stood at the absolute pinnacle of entertainment. She had shattered every barrier, proven every doubter wrong, and claimed a throne no one thought she could reach. But the view from the top was lonelier than she ever imagined. And the battles ahead would prove that fame, for all its glitter, offers no protection from the cruelties of the world or the weight of one's own expectations. The 1970s belonged to Barbra Streisand. While others fought for roles, she chose them. While others begged for creative input, she demanded it. And while Hollywood resisted, she forced the industry to bend to her will. Though it came at a cost that would scar her reputation for decades. In 1973, she starred in The Way We Were opposite Robert Redford. The film became a cultural phenomenon, and Barbra's performance as Katie Murawski, a passionate political activist, showcased a depth that silenced critics who dismissed her as Oz. Merely a singer playing dress-up, the title song, which she sang, became one of the most beloved ballads of all time, winning an Academy Award and cementing her status as both actress and musical legend. But behind the scenes, the battle was brutal. Directors tried to sideline her input. Producers dismissed her suggestions. When she questioned a script choice or a camera angle, she was labeled difficult. When male actors did the same, they were called dedicated. She later said, "It wasn't difficult. I just refused to be ignored." Her relationship with hairdresser turned producer John Peters began in 1973 and became one of the most turbulent chapters of her life. Peters was charismatic, volatile, and ambitious. Together, they decided to remake A Star is Born in 1976, with Barbra starring and Peter producing. The project became a battleground. Studio executives doubted her vision. The press mocked the pairing. Critics sharpened their knives before the film even premiered. When A Star is Born was released, reviews were mixed, but audiences loved it. The film became a massive box office success, and Barbra's song, Evergreen, which she co-wrote, won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. She had proven once again that her instincts were right, but the victory was bittersweet. The media painted her as a controlling diva, and John Peters, despite his support, brought chaos into her personal life. Their relationship was passionate but destructive, filled with fights, reconciliations, and an intensity that left her exhausted. They would break up and reunite multiple times over the years, but the damage was done. Barbra had learned that even when she won, the narrative could be twisted against her. By the late 1970s, Barbra had a new obsession, a project she had been dreaming of for years. Yentl, the story of a Jewish girl in Eastern Europe who disguises herself as a boy to study the Talmud. It was personal, deeply meaningful, and a story she felt compelled to tell. But it came with an audacious demand. She wanted to direct. Hollywood laughed in her face. Studio after studio rejected her. "Women don't direct," they said. "Audiences won't accept it. You're an actress, not a filmmaker." For nearly 15 years, she fought to get Yentl made, enduring rejection after rejection, humiliation after humiliation. She mortgaged her own home to keep the project alive. She spent years rewriting the script, composing songs, studying every aspect of filmmaking, and finally, in 1983, she got her chance. She would star, direct, produce, and co-write the music. It was an unprecedented level of control for any filmmaker, let alone a woman in an industry dominated by men. When Yentl was released in November 1983, critics were divided. Some praised her ambition and vision. Others attacked her for daring to step behind the camera. The film was a modest box office success, but Barbra had achieved something extraordinary. She had directed a major studio film, something only a handful of women had ever done. And yet, when award season came, she was snubbed. Yentl received 5 Academy Award nominations, but Barbra was not nominated for Best Director. The message was clear. Hollywood would tolerate her success, but it would not celebrate her audacity. She later admitted not being nominated for directing Yentl hurt more than any bad review ever could. The 1970s and early 1980s had been a decade of triumph and torment. Barbra had dominated the box office, won awards, created art on her own terms. But every victory came with a price. She was called difficult, demanding, controlling, a diva who couldn't be managed. The same qualities that made male directors visionary made her impossible. She had proven she could do anything. But the world made sure she paid for every inch of ground she claimed. And the exhaustion of constantly fighting, constantly defending herself, constantly being reduced to a caricature was beginning to take its toll. By the mid-1980s, Barbra Streisand had conquered everything except the one thing she wanted most: respect without qualification, recognition without resentment, and the freedom to create without being punished for her ambition. That fight was far from over. On June 17, 1967, Barbra Streisand stood before 135,000 people in Central Park for a free concert that was supposed to be a triumph. She was 25 years old at the peak of her powers. New York had come to celebrate its hometown girl made good. The crowd stretched as far as she could see. Cameras captured every moment for a television special. It should have been perfect. And then in the middle of a song, her mind went blank. She forgot the lyrics. For just a few seconds, she stood frozen. The words vanished, her voice silent. She recovered quickly, laughing it off, finishing the song. The audience cheered. No one seemed to notice or care. But Barbra noticed, and for her, those few seconds of forgetting became a wound that never healed. In the days and weeks that followed, something inside her shifted. The fear that had always lurked beneath her confidence. The fear planted in childhood when she was told she wasn't good enough suddenly roared to life. What if it happened again? What if next time she couldn't recover? What if the world finally saw that she was a fraud, just as her mother had always implied? The stage fright that gripped her was not nervousness, it was terrifying. A physical, paralyzing dread that made her heart race. Her hands tremble, her throat tightens. Clear's throat, she began to dread live performances. The thought of standing before an audience exposed and vulnerable filled her with such anxiety that she could barely breathe. So she made a decision that shocked the entertainment world. She stopped performing live completely. For 27 years, from 1967 to 1994, Barbra Streisand, one of the greatest live performers of all time, refused to step onto a concert stage. She continued making films. She recorded albums in the safety of studios where she could control every note, every take, every imperfection. But live performance, the very thing that had built her career, became something she could no longer face. The world didn't understand. How could someone so talented, so successful, be afraid? Critics accused her of being precious, of thinking she was too important for live audiences. Fans felt abandoned, cheated of the chance to see her perform. But Barbra couldn't explain the terror without revealing a vulnerability. She had spent her entire life trying to hide. She later confessed, "I was terrified of forgetting the lyrics again. It became an obsession. I couldn't risk it." The absence? From live performance coincided with a period of deep personal loneliness. Her marriage to Elliot Gould had ended. Her relationship with John Peters was tumultuous and ultimately unsustainable. She dated, had relationships, but nothing lasted. The same intensity and perfectionism that made her an icon made her impossible to live with for those who couldn't match her drive. She spent years in therapy trying to understand the wounds of her childhood. The absent father, the cold mother, the relentless feeling of being unwanted. She read, studied psychology, searched for answers in self-help books and spiritual teachings. But the core wound remained. No amount of success could fill the void left by a love she never received as a child. Her homes became sanctuaries, elaborately designed spaces where she could control every detail. She collected art, antiques, furniture, filling rooms with beauty as if surrounding herself with perfection to somehow make her feel whole. But the collections, like the awards and accolades, were just objects. They couldn't love her back. Friends described her as isolated, lonely, a woman who had everything except peace. She worked constantly directing films, producing albums, building projects because work was the one place where she felt in control. But the cost was steep. Relationships suffered, time slipped away, and the fear of performing live became a prison. She couldn't escape. In interviews during this period, when asked about returning to the stage, she deflected, joked, or changed the subject. The truth was too painful to admit. The woman the world saw as fearless was terrified. The perfectionist, who demanded excellence from everyone around her, was paralyzed by the fear of her own imperfection. The silent years were not a retreat. They were surviving. Barbra had spent her entire life proving she was enough. And the thought of standing on a stage and failing even for a moment was a risk she could not take. So she stayed away creating. In private, performing in studios, hiding the fear beneath a reputation for being difficult and demanding. But the stage, like an old lover, never stopped calling. And one day, she would have to decide if she was brave enough to face it again. In 1993, after 27 years of silence, Barbra Streisand made a decision that terrified her more than anything she had ever done. She would return to the stage. Not for a single charity event or a brief television special, but for a full concert tour. The announcement sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. Tickets sold out in minutes. Scalpers charged tens of thousands of dollars. The entire industry held its breath. But for Barbra, the decision was tormenting. The stage fright that had driven her into hiding had not disappeared. If anything, it had deepened with time. She spent months in therapy working with specialists, preparing herself mentally for the moment she would once again stand before a live audience, exposed and vulnerable. On New Year's Eve 1993, at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, Barbra walked onto the stage for the first time in nearly 3 decades. The audience erupted. She stood in the spotlight, her hands trembling, and began to sing. Her voice, still flawless, still capable of stopping time, filled the arena. And somehow she made it through. The tour that followed in 1994 became one of the highest-grossing concert tours of all time. City after city, night after night, she faced her fear and won. But the victory was never easy. Before each show, she battled nausea, panic, and the overwhelming urge to run. She later admitted she kept a teleprompter on stage, not because her memory had failed, but because the fear of forgetting, even once, still haunted her. Yet, she did it. And in doing so, she proved something to herself that no amount of awards or acclaim had ever proven: that she was strong enough to face her greatest terror and survive. The 1990s brought other transformations. In 1996, she directed, produced, and starred in The Mirror Has Two Faces, a film about a brilliant but overlooked woman who is loved for her mind but longs to be desired for her beauty. The film was deeply personal, exploring themes Barbra, had lived with her entire life. The tension between intellect and appearance, between being respected and being loved. Critics gave mixed reviews, but Barbra didn't care as much anymore. She had told a story that mattered to her, and that was enough. She received a Golden Globe nomination for her performance, but the real reward was the catharsis of making a film about a woman who finally learns to love herself, flaws and all. Then in 1996, at a dinner party, she met James Brolin, an actor known for his warmth, stability, and quiet confidence. For the first time in her life, Barbra found a partner who didn't need to compete with her, who wasn't threatened by her success, who loved her not despite her intensity, but because of it. They married on July 1, 1998, in a private ceremony. At her Malibu estate, she was 56 years old. After decades of failed relationships, loneliness, and the belief that perhaps she was too much for anyone to truly love, she had found something she thought impossible. A partnership built on mutual respect, humor, and genuine affection. Friends said they had never seen her so at peace. The woman who had spent her life chasing perfection finally stopped running. She still worked, still recorded albums, and still performed occasionally, but the desperation was gone. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Her albums in the 2000s continued to chart. Love is the Answer in 2009, Release Me in 2012, Partners in 2014, all debuted in the top 10, making her the only artist to have #1 albums in 6 consecutive decades. The records kept coming, but they no longer defined her. In interviews, she spoke more freely about her struggles. The stage fright, the loneliness, the fear of never being good enough. The walls she had built for decades began to come down, revealing not the diva the tabloids had painted, but a woman who had survived by sheer will and was finally learning to forgive herself for being human. She bought a historic estate in Malibu and spent years designing it, filling it with art, books, and memories. She and James traveled, laughed, grew old together in a way she never imagined possible. For the first time, she was not just Barbra Streisand, the icon. She was Barbra, a woman who had finally found home. The return to the stage had been about more than music. It had been about reclaiming the part of herself that fear had stolen, and in doing so, she discovered that the greatest performance of her life was not on any stage, but in learning to live without the constant need for applause. For decades, Barbra Streisand had been told to stay quiet. Sing, act, entertain, but don't speak. Don't have opinions. Don't use your platform for anything beyond your art. It was the unspoken rule for entertainers, especially women. Stay in your lane. Refused. From the earliest days of her career, she had been political. She campaigned for Democratic candidates, raised money for civil rights causes, and spoke openly about issues that mattered to her. In 1963, she performed at the March on Washington. In the 1970s, she fought for the Equal Rights Amendment. She supported LGBTQ+ rights decades before it was safe or popular to do so. But as she grew older and more established, her voice grew louder. She used her platform not just to advocate quietly, but to challenge power directly. She became a vocal critic of conservative policies, a fierce defender of women's reproductive rights, an advocate for climate change action, and a champion for gun control. And the backlash was vicious. She was called a limousine liberal, out of touch, a Hollywood elitist lecturing regular Americans. Conservative media attacked her relentlessly. Radio hosts mocked her. Politicians dismissed her. Death threats arrived at her home. Security had to be increased. The message was clear. Shut up and sing. She refused. The attacks intensified during the Trump era. Barbra became one of the former president's most vocal critics, using social media to challenge his policies, his behavior, his treatment of women. She called him out by name, unafraid of the consequences, and the consequences were severe. Trump. Supporters flooded her social media with hate. Her concerts were boycotted. Former fans burned her albums. She was labeled unpatriotic, ungrateful, and has been desperate for attention. The vitriol was personal, ugly, and relentless. But Barbra had spent her entire life being told she wasn't good enough, that she should change, that she should be quiet. She had survived childhood rejection, industry sexism, and decades of being called difficult for demanding respect. A few angry tweets were not going to silence her. Now, she later said, "I have a platform. I have a voice. If I don't use it, what's the point of having it?" Her activism extended beyond politics. She donated millions to causes she believed in: women's health research, heart disease awareness, climate change initiatives, education programs. She funded scholarships for underprivileged students, supported AIDS research when it was still stigmatized, and used her wealth to create tangible change.